All right. Hey, welcome everyone. So this is another episode of Mental Health in Tech. We've been doing a couple of these. I've been taking a bit of a break due to the birth of my daughter, but now we're just churning out these. Which is great to be back on track again. And so in this episode, we have invited Jeremy. Sure, Jeremy, you should correct me if I'm wrong. I think your surname is pronounced Nagel.
Yeah, nailed it.
Yes, because it's very close to Afrikaans Nagel.
I would have accepted that as well.
Okay, Jeremy Nagel.
It's a Dutch name originally.
Yeah, exactly. So we're back, and I think we were actually just talking and so many stuff. We were just talking beforehand and so many things came up as we were talking and we were like, oh crap, we should have recorded that. That we just went like, you know what, let's actually not do any introductions. Let's just head straight into it. So, this is kind of the explicit, let's do it live version of it. So let's see how it goes. But another thing as well, without going on a bit of a tangent, is I'm wondering how much background I should give about myself every time we do this, because my guess is that if you're listening to this one, you've probably already listened to a couple of these and you don't want me to go again, hey, my name is Schalk, I'm a contractor or whatever. You can just Google me if you want to learn more about who I am and what I do. Luckily, Schalk Venter is a very unique name in tech. So unique that my co-host is also named Schalk. But I think the fact that that's a very interesting dynamic actually shows you how unique a name like Schalk kind of actually is. So we're probably the only Schalks in tech, though. And yeah, so one thing we do since our very first guest, Gideon, has kind of introduced it to us, is that when we introduce ourselves, we also just take a bit of stock in terms of how we're feeling, where we're at, and so forth. So I'll do mine quickly, and then I'll hand over to Schalk Neethling, and he'll do his. And Jeremy, then we can hand over to you, and then you can also just kind of also introduce yourself, and also just take stock of where you are emotionally and so forth. So honestly, from my side, sure, this is probably the worst I felt in any of these episodes. I was not keen to do this right now, which actually means that this is exactly when we should do these type of discussions. Yeah, I don't know, I don't know whether I'm getting sick or whether it's just exhaustion, or just so many things going on, but I feel awful. I just think I just need a lot of sleep. So for those that don't know, my baby is about 6 weeks. My baby daughter is about 6 weeks old now. So yeah, that kind of puts your body a bit through the paces, but also emotionally as well. It's tough because not only are you tired, but so this is my second child, and things get real. When you have kids and, when you have more than one kid, you start thinking about the future, you start thinking about the decisions you make, you start being specifically, as I'm seeing my first daughter Inga, she's about 2 now, and you kind of just see how fast they grow. You kind of, I don't know, there's a lot of existential anxiety that comes with that. So I think I'm dealing with a lot of things emotionally, and also I'm just tired and exhausted. So yeah. But I just resigned myself to, I'm just going to show up, and then if I don't actually talk that much, I'll just chill in the background and listen. I guess it's better to be here than to not be here, regardless of how much I actually provide of value. But yeah, so that's where I am. Schalk Neethling, maybe a quick introduction of yourself and kind of where you're at this moment.
Yeah, thanks so much. And yeah, I know what it feels like. I haven't been in this small child world for a long time. My youngest is 17, but it is exhausting, and I do get what you're saying about how you think about the world and how you think about you and where all this is going and what's the point of all of this. Does become quite a regular topic on your mind. It's for real. So I hear what you're saying. Who am I? I'm also not going to go into too much because it's always hard to answer anyway. So I would say, yes, Google me. I'm sure you'll find a bunch of stuff. But in the gist of it is building my own company. It has a lot to do with open source, with web accessibility, front-end consulting, teaching, and just I'm into the whole indie maker space. So anything that's indie related, I'm super keen to be there. And I love community. So I run a couple of communities, one around supporting indie makers called the Indie Founder Support Group. And then I also have a community for early staged web developers called the Mycelium Network. So that's like a rough thing. I also record 2 other podcasts, but that's about as much as I'm going to go into. And then how am I doing? I'm okay. It was my first of the month as a 100% indie creator, and it was a rough one. I'm still some payments bounced and that kind of thing because the money didn't quite come in at the pace that I was expecting it to. So I need to put out some fires and explain myself to some companies, but it's okay. They'll live and I'll live to fight another day. Other than that, I mean, I'm pretty good. I'm feeling a lot more positive, which is good, even with everything that's going on. Normally, when stuff like all these things not going through, the payments not going through, it's one of those things where they say when money is not a problem, it's not a problem, but when money is a problem, it's the only problem. So I get what they're trying to say with that. It becomes very all-consuming in your life once you go through a bit of a dry spell, a bit of a tough time. But things are looking up, so I'm going to keep being positive and just keep going at it. I'm tired for a different reason. I'm tired just because I have early mornings. What I mean by that is like working until 3 a.m. because I'm a night owl, but also because I'm building my own company. So there's so much that you have to do, and so 9:27 in the morning is really early for me. But I don't mind making the sacrifice because I enjoy these conversations so much that even though when I woke up, I was like, I have to get up. I was just like, yeah, but it's for a good reason. So yeah, I'm glad I'm here. I'm glad I'm awake, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So with that, I'm going to throw the mic over to Jeremy, and please, Jeremy, take your time and tell us everything about you, because I only know you by name and by some Googling I did.
Well, I'm now feeling guilty for having roused you both from your bed.
No, put the guilt aside.
I'm grateful for the opportunity, and hopefully we'll have a good chat.
I also want to say, it's I can promise you, I've been awake like 4 hours now already. I didn't wake. I think you underestimate how of a late sleeper my daughter is.
Cool. Well, I hope she maintains consistency at 5 a.m. and then consistency is probably the main thing, regardless of when it happens. So for my intro, I don't have kids yet, though that's something that my wife and I are working on, and I'm trying to collect stories about both the positive and the challenging parts of it, and I've heard that first 6 months are really hard, and then after that it gets better. So hopefully that happens for us if that does come through. And apart from working on a family, I've been a software developer for 12 years. I've been in sort of the indie maker space for a while as well. There's a group called MicroConf that I really like, a collection of software developers who are doing micro businesses. And that was the business that I had more recently that I ended up then selling to a large corporate. And that's now my day job, working for the large corporate, running the business that I had before. And then I've got a new side business called Focus Bear, which is around helping people like myself who are neurodivergent. I'm autistic and I have ADHD, and I've basically built software tools to help myself with various executive functioning challenges and trying to help other people as well. And apart from feeling guilty, I am feeling a little bit relieved because I've got a product launch in the day job that's going live on Tuesday, and there was some support content that I needed to get out there, and I wasn't sure that I'd get it out in time, but I mostly did it today. Looking forward to having a chat.
And I think maybe a good place to start would be to kind of contextualize how you ended up here. So, I think we're not at the point where people are just mailing us at random and saying, hey, I want to come and talk to you guys. So effectively, I actually know Jeremy because taking it all the way back. So, sure, I can't remember, 2016, 2017?
Yeah.
2017, yeah. He wrote an article titled, I think, Programmers Who Give a Shit, where he kind of lamented how powerful kind of tech skills are in this day and age, and how little people are actually just considering using those skills for the greater good. Those skills are primarily applied to making money. And at that time, I was kind of working at Open Up, which was a nonprofit working within the realm of civic technology and so forth. So exploring the intersection between civic technology and between civil society and technology. And actually, that's also how I know Schalk Neethling as well, because he also used to do contract work for Open Up as well. And at that point, I was like myself and a good friend of mine, JD, we were doing work for National Treasury. So I think I messaged Jeremy and I said, hey, it might actually be worth talking about the work that we do, and also what are some of the challenges, at that point, I was going through a bit of a revelation in terms of what it means to apply your tech skills for social good. I think if you haven't done it yet, you have a very naive view of it, in terms of, I'm going to use machine learning and blockchain to solve world hunger or whatever, And I think once you start exploring those spaces, you realize it's actually very frustrating, it's actually very boring, and it's very demanding, and it takes a big toll on you. And just at that time, I also felt like not enough people were talking about kind of people who are working at these intersections between technology and some type of, civil society or social good or so forth. So, and I think so that, ironically enough, so then he interviewed us for his podcast, and now I'm interviewing him for my and Schalk's podcast. Also, just another very interesting thing. At that point, Cape Town was going through a water crisis, and there was talk of water. There was this thing about day zero, and this talk of water running out and whatever. And it's very ironic that now that we're kind of in a podcast again together, there's an electricity crisis, and we are at stage 5 load shedding or whatever, and I have my generator running in the background. So it seems that whenever Jeremy and I are on a podcast together, there's a big lack of some strategic resource in the country. So
I feel like I shouldn't do another recording with you, otherwise the next one there'll be no food.
Yeah, exactly. There's going to be like national hunger or something. So I think the reason why I actually approached, so obviously I was kind of following Jeremy a bit on LinkedIn and kind of commenting on some of the stuff he posted, and and you've been posting quite a lot around kind of as you mentioned, your own neurodivergence and the focus-based stuff and so forth. And I actually thought that there's actually a really great conversation there to be had with you, not only about those things, but I think also because between the three of us, there's definitely also a big interest in using technology for good. And I think there's some interesting things to explore there in terms of what are the correlations between people who, I don't know whether it's people that are open about kind of their emotional struggles or so forth, or mental struggles, and being open about challenges socially and so forth. Yeah, like I don't know how to articulate it just yet, but I think there's something interesting there as well in terms of where these two worlds overlap in terms of people that tend to fall more within this type of way of experiencing emotions and stuff and concerns around the state of the world and so forth. But yeah, I'll let the way of articulating that would be to just emerge organically. But I think a good place to start, and maybe a question to you, Jeremy, would be like, I think all of us, myself specifically, I know Schalk as well, and I would assume the same for you as well. It's not like you woke up one day and then all of a sudden you started like struggling with ADHD or, with things related to like autism and so forth, and then just started speaking about it openly. More often than not, like you kind of experience these things in private or struggle with it in private, and then you make a deliberate decision to be like, I'm actually going to start speaking about this openly. Correct me if I'm wrong if that wasn't the case, but I'm curious kind of I'm curious how you arrived at that point. What led to you saying like, I'm actually going to start posting on LinkedIn about this stuff?
For me, the point where I started being public about it was actually when I got formally diagnosed, because I had always suspected autism from when I was in high school, that I had major social challenges. I mean, these days I think there's a lot more early diagnosis. When I was a kid, it was probably less well known that certain social difficulties might be linked to different neurodivergences. And I'm very happy that in Australia, at least, there's a lot that teachers are aware of it, that parents are aware of it, and being able to help young people at an early age means that there's less trauma accumulated over the years. The ADHD was a real surprise to me though, because I hadn't really associated myself as someone who would be ADHD, because I primarily think of ADHD as being the hyperactive kid, and that wasn't really me. I was a pretty quiet kid, but there's the two angles of ADHD around the inattention and hyperactivity, and that was me. That I'd be in class and I was generally quite ahead of the rest of the class, so even though I was daydreaming, it didn't really matter because I was able to figure out the answer, so I didn't really get picked up. But it's something that as I got older and I started to have to manage my own schedule, I had major issues with some of the executive dysfunction that is often associated with ADHD. For example, in high school, even though I lived 5 minutes away from school, I was late to school nearly every day. And part of that was because I didn't enjoy high school, but it was also that I'd get into this state of time blindness, which is a common ADHD term, where I'll be hyper-focusing on something. In high school, it was playing computer games. Later in my day job, it was writing some code and getting so immersed in it that I didn't realize that, I should have already gotten on the train by now. And that caused problems for me in a career perspective. I got fired from a job. I was a co-founder / CTO of a startup, and I was really enjoying that title. But because I was consistently late for board meetings and I was generally disorganized, my co-founder basically thought that I wasn't the right fit, which was probably the right decision, but that was very painful for me. And there were other situations too where my difficulties with generally being organized, being on time, and being able to cope with emotional stresses resulted in me losing jobs. I basically got fired from my first 5 professional jobs, which wasn't really great for my self-esteem. I have now learned strategies that have allowed me to get back on track, but I didn't really seek formal diagnosis until last year because of the cost associated with it. I had a pre-diagnosis of autism 7 years ago, but to get it formalized was going to cost me several $1,000s, and I didn't really feel like it was actually going to lead to any benefit, so I didn't bother going down that path. But then more recently, I've had the money to be able to do it, and it has been amazingly freeing. I had thought that getting a diagnosis would make me feel bad about myself, but it's been the opposite, that it has meant that instead of beating myself up for some of the character traits that I had seen as character flaws, I now see it as part of my mental makeup. Not to say that I want to always say be late for meetings or do things that are going to affect other people, but just have awareness of why it might be hard for me and then specific tactics.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And like, I also want to in a second hand over to Schalk to maybe like kind of ask some of his own questions. But it's interesting because in the last episode, so we had Bhavani on, who she also has autism, and I think one thing that I mentioned is, okay, so obviously it's a spectrum, so there's levels of severity, and I've kind of for a very long time also like wondered whether I either like fall on the spectrum or I'm very adjacent to the spectrum. I think that would explain a lot of things in my past and things that I beat myself up on. Like, and I think when I tell that to people who just like kind of don't know me that intimately, they're like, oh, but Schalk, you're so well spoken and whatever, and it's like, yeah, but sure, like, but a lot of that I kind of trained myself in a very mechanical way, just from like, oh, you shouldn't say that in like in a group discussion, or hey, maybe you shouldn't be honest about this thing, or hey, people don't do that type of thing, like just like in public or whatever. And so I think a lot of that is just like from trial and error, and like I've said some strange things which I'm now like, oh yeah, I can see why that went down pretty badly. But like, if you know me intimately, like, like I think when I told my wife about this for the first time, she's like, yeah, that would actually make a lot of sense, but like, it's the exact same thing as you mentioned, is that, like, so I'm, kind of close to, like, I think I'm like turning 37 this year. Like, I actually don't know for a fact how old I am. I think I'm 37.
Sleep deprivation is kicking in.
Yeah, no, but like, that's one of the people always laugh at me, but like, it's like, I don't know, like sometimes I forget how old I am. And like, it's the exact same thing, like that's obviously now, like, there would be a cost, and what would really change? Like, I think the benefit is, as you mentioned, you would get a lot of like self-acceptance and so forth. But I think also I've gone through a lot of that already through the lens of depression, so there's different lenses that you can look at it, so I maybe went through it like through the lens of like I don't want to say self-hatred, but, like, yeah, maybe self-hatred is an accurate word. But, like, so I think I made a lot of peace with those parts of myself, maybe through a different lens already. And where, like, if I were to get diagnosed now as, like, somewhere on the spectrum, like, nothing would really change. But, man, like, if I were to have had that earlier in my life, in my 20s, it would really have saved me a lot of pain. But I think, as you rightfully point out, at that time, I don't know what it was like in Australia, but in South Africa, it's definitely like there was a massive stigma around it. And like, people like viewed autism like almost on the same level as stuff like Down syndrome or whatever, like, it's like, oh, you physically, like, you can't have a functional life. I think there also wasn't an awareness of like it also being a spectrum and a lot of stuff. So you didn't even consider it. You're like, hey, I actually finished high school, so obviously I don't have autism. Like, because if I had autism, I would be like have to go to a special school or something. So I find that very interesting, and like, it's interesting that I'm kind of in a somewhat similar space than you. But I think once again, I've made a lot of peace with a lot of those things through a different lens already. So I see very little benefit in actually pursuing that right now, specifically as Schalk Neethling pointed out, like funds, and specifically the funds when you have 2 kids. It's probably not a big priority. But yeah. Schalk Neethling, I'm curious what questions you might have for Jeremy.
Yeah. Where to begin? So I think on the one side, I think the whole thing behind being diagnosed, I think it's a sense of validation that the thing you've suspected is true. And therefore, if other people were like, there's these common tropes around mental illness, which is, back in the day, what other Schalk was referring to is the idea of just cheer up, life stuff for everybody, get over it, that kind of thing. And I think what we've gained through, because then there's people who would also say, why do you always want to label everything? And I get that. Like sometimes we do over-label things. We want to give every little thing in our lives and in the world a label. But I think in this case, in these cases, there is a sense of validation in that where it's you are recognized for being different, and that your difference is not a deficit. It's just that you function differently. And if you play to your strengths, you can be as efficient or perhaps even more efficient than the next person. But because, and I think what happens in that case, the reason why that happens is because the way you expend your energy is different. So instead of trying to change who you are because people are telling you that who you are is wrong in a sense, you're not doing that because you're like, oh, but that's just me. That's part of me. So I need to find out how to work best with who I am. And that's a way different way of expending energy. So I think that is kind of like how I see the whole thing. And the fact that not being able to get that validation through a diagnosis, being blocked by money is, it's a whole other thing that I don't know if I want to open that can of worms, but it's really unfortunate that's the blocker. That getting validation is blocked by your financial status in the world. But I think what I want to jump into is, or maybe I should leave it at that, and you can kind of just riff off that, Jeremy.
Yeah, there were a few points I'd like to dig into there. I liked that you were touching on deficits and strengths, because that's one of the interesting things about ADHD, that it has deficit in the name. And there's some arguments that actually it's not really a deficit of attention, but rather it's that often the world expects us to do things that are a bit boring. Whereas if there are things that can be made really interesting, then it's very easy for me to spend hours on end. And I think that's why I've tended to gravitate towards my own projects and to gravitate towards social impact projects, because I really see the significance and meaning behind my work immediately. And it's very motivating then for me to be able to work on it. So I think that's key, that there's this idea of the social model of disability, that if someone is in an environment which is set up for people who aren't disabled, then they're going to struggle. For example, if you're a wheelchair user and you're in a city that doesn't have the curb cuts, then it's going to be really challenging for you to get around. But if they are in a more modern city that has those ramps at each of the curbs, then you can get around okay. And the same thing with autism and ADHD and other neurodivergences, or even dyslexia would be a great example, that in an environment where I have to write things with pencil and paper, then lack of spelling ability is going to be a real impediment. But in the modern world, with all of the assistive software that's built into modern operating systems, it's almost like spelling is no longer relevant, that it auto-corrects for us and we can have things read aloud. That's what really excites me, that we're seeing a world where some of the inherent challenges are becoming less problematic, because we can have society accepting people as they are, and also ways of augmenting our own powers so that it becomes less of a problem. And then in terms of, it's the other side of it, in terms of the value of the diagnosis, beyond the validation, what it has been helpful for me is being able to request specific accommodations in respect of, for example, I really don't cope well in an office environment, and particularly not in an open plan office environment. And that's normally what I've been faced with in all of my previous jobs. And indeed, in my current day job, the office is super noisy. If I go in there, then it's very hard for me to do anything except have meetings, because if anyone is talking next to me and I'm trying to write code or I'm trying to work on a report or do analysis, I can't do it. My brain is overwhelmed by the extra sensation. And so I haven't actually really had to pull out the diagnosis in order to do it. I have disclosed to my manager, and I guess disclosed to everyone because I put it on LinkedIn, but I haven't necessarily had to put up a fight for being able to work from home. I'm very grateful for that. But I think a lot of people need a diagnosis in order to say to their employer, hey, you know how you want me to go into the office 3 days per week? That's actually going to have a net negative impact on my productivity. I'm going to get more done if I can work from home. And that's certainly the case for me.
Yeah, that is really great. And sure, I have so many questions also around specifically. So you mentioned that you kind of set up a lot of structures for yourself, and you've created tooling for yourself as well to kind of navigate that space. And I do think there's a great discussion there for myself specifically in terms of when does that become procrastination? Because I've definitely been in spaces where no, I just need to get the space and the tooling, and my office just needs to be very conductive to concentration, and then it's going to happen, So I think something that I'm unsure for myself as well is when is there a bit of tough love required? And I think that's, for me, is a very hard balance to strike. Maybe, I don't know, maybe I just have less faith in myself in terms of my ability to always engage sincerely. I do see myself sometimes making excuses and stuff, and not wanting to do stuff that's fun and so forth. Do you think there's a danger in not being completely almost tough love adverse, because even with my daughter now, sometimes I need to be no, Schalk, you need to wake up now in the middle of the night. This is a decision you made, this sucks, but you made this decision, and no, get out of bed, And so, but that's just my personal experience. I'm curious specifically for you, Schalk, Neethling as well. Is that a balance that you try and figure out yourself as well? When do you need to just be this is going to suck, and I just need to actually do it to the best of my abilities?
Sure, I can jump in. I totally get it and that's one of the reasons why I'd love to talk about because you're right in the thick of it, Jeremy, concerning the tooling specifically around this stuff. Because I think these can play two roles. Maybe there's more, but two roles come to mind immediately. The one is it can be this enabler where it allows you to do things that you otherwise wouldn't have, or you would have struggled at the very least. Or Schalk, you said, it can be a source of procrastination, because if I can just find the right set of tools, and then everything will just magically work for me. And I think that then makes you put an unfair expectation on the tool, that it will be a magic bullet that'll just, you'll install it, you'll open it up, and suddenly your whole life will make sense. I think with everything, there's this balance to be found between these things. Because I know that so for the first week or two in August, so last month, I struggled to find my footing, going from almost 12 years essentially working for a single company to now building my own company, and now where previously my calendar was dictated by the client or the employer, now my calendar is mine to decide how I spend my time and where my energy and where my focus and money and all that kind of stuff goes. And it's amazing once you realize that, and it like really settles in, and you're like, oh no. Did I make a mistake here? Was it better for me to be in that previous situation? And then you start grasping at these tools, because you're thinking like, oh, if there's just a tool that can like basically play the role of an employer for me, then that'd be cool. But then that is the thing. You're putting an expectation on these tools that is just unrealistic. And so then you start blaming yourself, you're blaming the tools, and you just start spinning your wheels, and that's where the procrastination comes in. So it'd be interesting to hear, Jeremy, how you think about these tools and what role you see them play, and what are the expectations we can have on these tools. What is their role really in people's lives? So maybe you can talk specifically to Focus Bear, or what aspects of your experience with not finding tools that work for you, and therefore you decided to create your own. Like what led to that, and what are the factors that you think are most important and most effective?
I think there's an overall discussion about the role of guiding structure, because it doesn't have to be a technological tool. It could be that I could write my morning routine on a piece of paper and stick it on the wall, and that may actually have a similar benefit. The way I like to think about it is in Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow, talks about the two types of the brain. There's basically the lizard brain, which is the old style brain, where it's great for getting you out of a fight with a lion, but not so great for writing a report or doing some deep analytical work. And then there's the planner part of the brain, which is able to think about the long-term consequences. And my view on the role of tools is that I want to be able to use that planner part of me to set up structures so that when the reptilian part of my brain is telling me to do something, that I have an opportunity, a speed bump, so that I can actually question, is this the right thing to be doing right now, or is it my anxiety speaking? Is it often part of the challenge for me that inspired me to do Focus Bear was anxiety creeping up at night time, and thinking about all the emails that might be sitting there, and thinking that I should go back and work more and more, and the same thing first thing in the morning. And that was having very detrimental impacts on my sleep and on my relationship with my wife. And I really wanted a way of locking myself out of email, a bit like in the Odyssey, Odysseus ties himself to the mast so that he can hear the sirens. That's what I was trying to achieve, of making it so that in that initial phase where my own ability to have self-control was pretty limited, I wanted something to augment that. But I think it is important when the talk of tough love. I think it's like you said, it's not enough to just put a tool in place. There's a book which talks about how silver bullets, technological silver bullets, rarely actually end up working, that it needs to be accompanied by change in the way of thinking and the way of acting, and yes, in broader tech interventions, it has to be about bringing broad society along. But for myself, it's a bit like the other tool that a lot of people gravitate to is ADHD medication, in terms of taking something like Ritalin or Vyvanse, which helps to upregulate the brain's ability to concentrate. But if it's not accompanied by metacognitive changes, in terms of me getting better at planning and me getting better at not saying yes to so many commitments, then the same problems are going to arise. And as the brain gets sensitized or desensitized to that extra stimulus from the meds or from the tool, it's going to stop working. So the way I'd say it is, it's a crutch. And crutches aren't a bad thing, but you don't want to be walking around with a crutch forever. You want to use it to get yourself into a space where you can actually have more of a buffer between the reptilian brain and the planner brain. So it ties in with all the good stuff around the benefits of mindfulness, that if I do more meditation, then I'm actually better able to make good decisions about what should I be doing in the moment. It's hard to do meditation when you are stressed out of your brain and you're not sleeping well and you're not exercising and not eating well and all of the other things. So I'd see it as part of a holistic solution, and that's what everything needs to be part of.
Yeah, 100%. And And this is maybe a good segue into kind of speaking a bit about like tech and tech in the wider like society and so forth, and like how all of these things intersect. But so very much related to what you spoke about. Like, so I think the World Bank published like a very comprehensive report about technology in the global south and civic technology in the global south, like maybe 7 years ago, and like I found it to be a fascinating read. But like disclaimer, I find very strange things to be fascinating reads, and like effectively it came exactly down on what you said. Like, it's technology as a force multiplier, either a force multiplier for good or for bad, but there needs to be something that can be multiplied. Like technology can't solve specific civic technology as well. Like you can't the solution can't be technology. The technology can force multiply an existing solution, make an existing solution more effective, more focused and so forth. So yeah, like I think that's also such a great analogy in terms of thinking about tooling for dealing with these type of things. Is there needs to be some type of practice or, personal thing that you're doing, and then using the technology as a force multiplier for that practice or whatever. Getting a calendar app isn't going to solve issues if you don't actually sit down and plan your day. If you just expect it to do and I think this type of thing is actually just going to get worse now with the AI kind of stuff, where people are just going to try and solve everything with AI, solving, ADHD with AI, solving depression with AI. We're just going to throw AI at things and think it's just going to be like a quick instant fix, which is very interesting. But we've been speaking a bit about focus bear and so forth, and you haven't really unpacked exactly what it is. So I think maybe that's a good next step, is for you to maybe talk a bit about what exactly is focus bear.
Sure. So the goal of focus bear is to provide a holistic distraction management system. The overall philosophy is that we've got very smart people working at Facebook and Instagram and TikTok trying to monetize our attention, and it's quite hard as an individual to fight back against that. So the goal is to use tech to combat some of the allure of tech, and some of the key aspects of it are that if I go to Facebook, it will block it immediately for me because I've nominated it as a distracting website. And the same, Facebook actually wasn't a huge problem for me. The problems were largely around news websites that tended to be a huge time suck for me. That I'd have this idea of, I wonder what's happening in Ukraine right now, or I wonder if South Africa still has water. And I'd go down a rabbit hole of reading various news websites trying to answer this question, which was actually not in any way relevant to the work that I needed to do at that point. And just by having a system to provide that speed bump, because if I really want to, I can go and find some obscure Norwegian news website that I've forgotten to add to my blocked list, and I can go and satisfy my desire for headlines that way. But just by adding it a bit more friction, making it more effort to go and do something distracting, it's almost like, I can't be bothered doing this fun and dopamine enriching thing. I'll just do some work instead, because that feels easier now than having to unlock my various distraction blockers. That's part of it. And we actually, I know AI is not a solution in itself, but we've got this feature where if you go to an unknown website where you haven't specifically marked it as safe or distracting, we use OpenAI to basically ask GPT, is this website relevant, given that the user said that they're focusing on writing a report? Is it relevant that they go to this obscure Wikipedia article about Russian tanks, for example? And then it's pretty good at saying, no, that's not relevant. You probably shouldn't use it. That's one side of it. And then the other side is really trying to tap into the holistic solution that I talked about, because I found for me that the days where I get up in the morning and I meditate and I go for a run and I do some journaling, I have much more productive days. So the app, it's got the distraction blocking, but it's also got a habit feature where it guides you through each of the morning routine features bit by bit. So I can't actually access my email until I've meditated and gone for my run and done my journaling. And then once I've done that, it unlocks those apps for me.
Yeah, and obviously, so the comment about AI was more specifically at AI as the selling point itself, instead of AI once again, being a false multiplier for something that existed before AI, which is trying to block specific sites and then using AI to enhance that instead of just throwing AI at the problem to figure out the solution. But yeah, I think that's pretty clear, but I think I just wanted to also be explicit about that. And so I think, unless Schalk, there's anything you maybe want to remark to that, I think from my side, what I just want to say is, can you create an app like that prevents you from just like starting new projects? Because that is my thing. My thing isn't like news, or it's like I'm like, oh, okay, I'm writing this piece of code, and like I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Hey, okay, there's something nice that can be abstracted here, and I create an abstraction, and I use that. I'm like, hey, this abstraction is really nice. Okay, let me start writing some documentation for it. Hey, like this actually makes a lot of sense. Awesome. Let me actually register a domain for this and make it an open source tool, and like actually, buy like SEO links, It's like if there's a tool for like just that slippery slope of like, hey, this thing is cool, let me start implementing it right now. That would be amazing. If I can at the very least have a tool where it's like, if I come up with a cool idea, then 3 months, like it prevents me from thinking about that thing for 3 months, and then it asks me, hey, do you still think this is a good idea? Like, I think my problem is I come up with ideas and then I'm like, hey, I need to start trying this, prototyping, implementing this right now in the middle of a workday. Yeah, so if you ever know about a tool that stops that type of thing, please let me know. But yeah, Schalk, I'm curious whether you have any questions related to that. Oh yeah, no, first, yeah, go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know that there's necessarily a magical tool that can do it, but I find for me it's helpful to interrupt myself during those flights of fancy. So I reminded to myself every 20 minutes to take stock of what I'm doing, and I write down in the app, what have I been doing in the last 20 minutes? What is my intention for the next 20 minutes? And I find that helps to actually give me pause of, do I really need to be doing this right now? Or should I just put it into my to-do list, my someday later list for 3 months' time? And like you said, then evaluate, do I need to actually spend time on it?
Problem is that needs discipline.
Yeah.
And I want something to force me to do it. That's the problem.
Yeah. But I have, solution is maybe too... it's like you hate in this question. That I won't say it's a solution, but what I have started doing, because Schalk, that is like my day every day, is finding something that's like, oh wow, this is like, oh, I can make this a web component. Oh, let me quickly go open a Git repo and then start copying it over in there, and then I end up spending more time on my little web component than the actual client project, which is not good. And so what I've
I sometimes spend like, sorry, I just want to interrupt you, but just to add to that, like spending like half an hour just Googling clever domain names or thinking about what this thing is going to be called. That is my life.
So I found that the AIs are quite good for that. Like sometimes I can't come up with a variable name. I would like explain what it does, and I ask the AI, like, give me 20 suggestions for a variable name. It's like, just call it something. You can make it better later. But anyway...
You're making it worse. You're making the problem worse. You're telling me, hey, Schalk, there's an even better way to do this.
Better way to distract you.
I think that is helpful though, because I find if I go into Google, it's very easy to get super distracted. Whereas talking to Bard or ChatGPT, because it doesn't have all the clickbaity headlines, I find it avoids me going off. Yeah, but right now it doesn't feel as tangent-inducing as doing a normal Google search.
That is very true. And I think that is why all these other ones are starting to kind of migrate into that space. This idea of almost a distraction-free search, if you could call it that. But what has worked for me with these like flights of fancy, as you said, Jeremy, is, I mean, sometimes they are good ideas, right? And you don't really want to lose them. But I think where the angst comes from, for me anyway, and I think it's like a neurological thing, is this idea that if I don't do it right now, I'm going to forget about it. And this is potentially a darn good idea. So what I do in those moments is I take my phone and I open up Signal and I record a voice note for myself where I just quickly talk through the idea and the basics of what I think it can be. And then I leave that voice note. And then at the end of the day or the next day, first thing, I download all those little audio clips that I made for myself, throw them into Mac Whisper, which is just a app that wraps OpenAI's Whisper, quickly transcribe all of them to text, and I put them into this notes thing called AnyType. And then my brain is kind of like in this process where I record it real quickly, and now I've made it a little bit more of a tangible thing by generating the text and putting the text in a specific list. My brain kind of calms down about it. It's like, cool, we've made a note about it, we talked about it a little bit, and it's right there. The thing that would be cool is that last mile that you're talking about. And I think something that might be interesting there is like there's this app called Readwise, and they've got a thing called Readwise Reader. And the nice thing about how I started using Readwise, and the main reason is this idea that when I'm reading a book on the Kindle and I make a highlight, all those highlights sync to your Readwise. And then on a Sunday, it sends you an email and it resurfaces some of the highlights you've made. And it tells you, like, you made this highlight and it was in this book. And so that's the last mile for me. Like, the voice note is super cool. Taking that and generating the text and saving that in AnyType is super nice. That kind of calms my brain down. But it'd be super cool if you could then also give it like that last thing, which is this mark to say, in a month's time, like, resurface this idea to me if I haven't done anything about it yet. And just remind me that I did this, but also do it on a day, like a Sunday, that's not in the middle of the week kind of thing. Do it on a Saturday or do it on a Sunday, so that you do not forget about this. And so you sometimes do get reminded about these ideas and you jump back. So I think this is, again, I think that you hit the nail on the head there, Schalk, when you said like the force multiplier. So there's something that exists, but then technology steps in and say, I can fix the last mile problem for you and make this even better. And that's what I wanted to say about the AI thing is, right now, everything is AI. And there's a good and a bad side to it, and I think it comes down to expectations again. If your expectation is that AI will solve everything, you're going to be disappointed. If you're looking at it through a lens of let's see what it can improve, then there's interesting things to try, because now you're trying something. It's like, what if like privacy policies? Like, there's so many privacy policies. How do you know if you want to sign up for a tool, how do you know if their privacy policy is like okay with your standards of when you sign up for a tool? It'd be super nice if there was an AI thing trained on a bunch of privacy policies, guided by people who have your best interest in mind, people like Center for Humane Technology and stuff like that. What's the folks? EFF, not the South African EFF. Who's kind of trained it. And so when you go on a site, they say, you know what, this site's privacy policy is super dodge. I wouldn't, and this is why we say so. And where it can do it in the moment, so to speak, through an AI LLM, so that, because otherwise people need to literally like review each and every privacy policy, because, the extension that the folks at DuckDuckGo makes, it does do that, but those are human filters. So a human needs to look at the privacy policy, and that's not scalable. So I think that's that amplifier that AI can play a role in.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be super cool. It's the Chrome extension, like you said. It's great for the larger companies, but for the more obscure ones that haven't been reviewed before, it would be helpful to just click a button and maybe it takes a minute or so for the LLM to process it, but it should be solvable. Next idea for the side project.
Yeah, I mean, that is literally a side project of mine.
Oh, no.
It is literally. I'm working on it.
Okay, so I can rest, I can rest at ease knowing that you're solving that problem. I don't have to spend mental energy on that, Schalk. But like, I also want to say, like, maybe, it's not even about like, hey, I have this cool idea, I want to build a startup around it or whatever. It's almost like the idea itself and the process of thinking through that idea is almost like the what would be the temptation itself. It's not any like tangibles that come from solving. It's like, ooh, yeah, what about this? Ooh, what about this? I think like I'm just very easily excitable when it comes to like interesting problems and figuring like puzzles. It's almost like a puzzle. Yeah, I think that's the problem. And solving a puzzle is way more interesting than, I have to refactor these 7 files and like, rename these variables and whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I feel the same. My only solution to that is having a team who can take my ideas and implement them, because I'm unlikely to follow through on my own. I'm great at coming up with ideas and doing a proof of concept, but actually getting it from, say, 60% done to 100% done, that's not what I'm great at.
But see, with that comes even more boring work, like writing reports and, doing like people like doing KPIs, managing KPIs and stuff like that. Then I'm like, nah, I'd rather just write code. Like, But so we are getting a bit closer to kind of the end of the hour mark. And there is one thing that I, as alluded to earlier, that I would love to touch on. And, it would feel like a bit of a wasted opportunity if we don't touch on this. And that is, all three of us here have some social good. I don't know how to articulate this, but some we're connected in some type of pursuit for greater good, or for exploring intersections between technology and social good and so forth. And this is actually a trend or a correlation that I find a lot of times. Like there does seem to be a correlation between people exploring applications of like not technology, but even just like thinking about technology and what it is used for, and thinking how it's placed socially, and people that tend to, in my experience, struggle with like even the discussion we had with Bhavania in the previous episode, like, so she's very much like kind of looking at how can she actually so she's a manager, and how can she in her organization like have a positive impact in terms of mental health and like kind of just general tech culture, like some of the more toxic parts of tech culture and so forth. And so she obviously, also has a background like with autism and so forth. And, like I do find a lot of people that either have like, autistic tendencies, or have like, mood disorders or whatever in these type of spaces. And I don't know whether it's just like that these things are so prevalent that just everyone has some type of like depression or something nowadays. So by definition, you just find these type of people everywhere, or whether there is something to be said around these type of discussions and people that struggle a bit in terms of adjusting to a world that has a bit of a very neurotypical requirement of kind of what it means to be a functioning member of society. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, whether there is any links that can be drawn there.
I haven't really looked at research, so it's anecdotes here, but I think there's probably something to the idea that people who are more sensitive in general will be more attuned to injustice. There's this concept of justice sensitivity, which is a common trait amongst people with ADHD and autism, and sometimes that can be really positive in terms of noticing ways where people are being treated unfairly. Sometimes it can be verging on cancel culture and seeing everything as an injustice, which isn't always true. And I guess the other side of it too is with women, one of the traits of autism and the reasons that it might not be diagnosed as frequently is that the stereotypical special interests of men with ADHD, where say there's the stereotype that boys with autism, are obsessed with model trains and with machines. And I think there's some research indicating that there might be a tendency for women with autism to be more likely to have a special interest of social activism and caring about making the world a better place.
That would definitely line up with a lot of my anecdotal experience as well, which is very, very interesting. Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Schalk, Neethling, I'm curious whether you have thoughts on this.
Yeah, I do. So I think it is this thing. I think, Jeremy, you said it well there, in the sense that because you are experiencing the world from a non-neurotypical perspective, you are finding that there are areas in your life, in whether that's work life or personal life, where it doesn't feel like the world was set up for you. It feels like you're fighting the system consistently. And in so doing, you become more sensitive to that. And as you rightfully mentioned, this can go too far. So it's again one of these situations where you have to rail it in at some point and say, whoa, because it can drive. I don't know if you all saw it, there's this sitcom that used to run called My Name is Earl. And there was this one episode where they end up on this little community of people living together, and they're talking about the climate and all these kinds of things. And then Earl gets all riled up about the fact that this is the first time he's hearing about climate change and all this kind of stuff. And at some point he just breaks down and he just goes, it doesn't matter what I do, nothing's going to change it. Everything is just going pow, 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 pow. And I was like, you can very easily get there, where it's just so overwhelming and you just start seeing everything that's wrong with the world and you feel completely hopeless, where it's it doesn't matter what I do, nothing's going to go. And I think that's a dangerous place to be, because depending on your mental state, that can go to a really dark place. But I think in that is the story of why maybe when you already live with these challenges, you are more sensitive to them, and therefore you start seeing them everywhere. And then and then I think what might add to that is when you find something that helps, maybe that be a therapist, maybe that be medication, maybe that be just access to medical care, and then realizing that there are millions and millions of people through no fault of their own who do not have access to these things, who can never even hope to have access to these things. And then you start thinking is there something I can do to help this? Can I talk about this and through that make a change? And if you're in tech, can I use technology in some way to help here? So I think it's this whole circle of events that leads us down that road. And then but then we need to be very careful that we don't get too close to the edge and fall over. And I think that's where community comes in, and that's where it's so great that we are finding each other, because we can see that in each other and say, dude, I think you're a little too close to the edge. Let me just pull you a little back a little bit here.
Yeah, definitely important to. I guess it's almost like grieving that there was a book about climate change and the mental state that we go through, and there's the initial state where it feels overwhelming and impossible, and it takes time to get to the acceptance part of it, where we see what the actions are that we can take that are actually feasible and that are going to make an impact, but without completely screwing ourselves over as well. One final point I want to make on this as well is I don't want to create the impression that neurodivergent people are saviors of the world and that we're the only ones who can see problems out there. I think it's that point about diversity that I'm pretty bad at noticing, say, the emotional state of my colleagues. Whereas my manager, who I believe is neurotypical, she'll notice really subtle signs that would indicate that someone's having a hard time. I think that's really important, that we have a mixture of people who can help with those different elements of the world, of the problems the world is going through. I tend to be more thinking about problems in the abstract, that climate change, I like the idea of working on that, and global poverty, I like the idea of working on that. But going and talking to a homeless person and having a conversation with them feels very scary to me, and it's not something that I do. I donate plenty of money to various charities, but those tangible little actions feel difficult. And I think that's where the human equation is important, and we need people who can handle all aspects of it.
No, 100%. I appreciate the fact that, thus far, Schalk Neethling has every episode, he's gleaned some wisdom from some old school sitcom. I think last episode it was Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, was it not? So I'm looking forward to what is going to be the source of insight. There's only so many sitcoms. We're going to have to start recycling, but that's great. Yeah. I think just in closing, maybe from my side, and I think this is also why, so there's two things there. Sometimes I just wonder whether it's self-selecting, insofar that people who are concerned with these type of things tend to have a different relationship with shame than people who are no, climate change is a lie and humans aren't causing it. And, people need to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. And, if you work hard, you can achieve anything, because I think the moment you realize that there are great injustices in the world, there are more often than not some ways that you benefit from that, and then I think that is something that you need to work through, and with that comes some shame and guilt and so forth. And I think being able to work through that kind of almost makes you, in terms of self-selection, makes you also more likely to be oh yeah, I also have depression, and it's fine, and I can talk about it and not feel ashamed about it, and so forth, and have an honest conversation about it. So I'm just wondering also whether it's just not a case of people who don't share these type of things also tend to not want to discuss things like depression and so forth. So it might not even be that there is more people within this world that suffer from these things. It's just maybe in other spaces it just isn't as discussed as openly. But there's definitely, yeah, I definitely, sorry, Jeremy, I don't know if you want to chime in there.
There probably is something around vulnerability and openness to new experience and sensitivity. I think that's a really good point that I hadn't thought about before, but it seems accurate.
And I think, but as rightfully pointed out, there is a danger in that. And I think one thing that I realized in myself is that sometimes, there's this, one of my psychologists actually introduced me to it, is this idea of toxic, what is it, almost toxic empathy, where it's, and I think also the word toxic is such a great term, but I think in popular culture, toxic has kind of lost its meaning. And maybe I'm saying this because my wife is in pharmacology. So we kind of equate toxicity with pollution or something that's inherently harmful. Whereas, from a scientific perspective, toxicity, it can be something that's good. Water, too much water can be toxic. So it's almost an extreme of something that isn't necessarily inherently good or bad, but if there's too much of it, it ends up being toxic. Even vitamins can be toxic. And I really like that approach of for example, something like empathy. You can't push it to toxic levels. You can push it to a level where you're paralyzing yourself, and almost that paralyzation becomes an excuse for not wanting to do anything. You don't take action because it's so much easier just being overwhelmed. As weird as that sounds, lamenting, but on the other hand, there's also, so I kind of follow Chris Hedges quite a bit as well. And so I don't know if you guys know him. He's done a lot of great writing. I think he has a great book called War is a Force That Gives Us Meaning, which he talks about his own like PTSD and so forth as a war correspondent. But I think he did a video series 2-3 years ago, maybe in the midst of COVID, where he kind of said that the most healthy state to be in this day and age is a state of mourning, like in terms of the world. In terms of where the world is, the state of the world, like if your default state isn't a state of mourning, that is a sign of maladjustment. And I find that very interesting. Yeah. It's an unhealthy relationship to have with the world if your default mode isn't in this day and age, like mourning. And that's very interesting, and that kind of also touches on the idea of maybe some people are just more sensitive to these things. Some other people might be able to compartmentalize it a bit more. But then once again, the flip side is where I was at some point in my life, where I just physically couldn't get out of bed because the world is just so fucked up, to use the technical term. But yeah, and I think that's maybe a good place to end it off. But
on a high note.
Yeah. Yes, there we go. Going out with a bang. All right, the world sucks. You suck. Everything sucks. See you guys next time. I think
you can still have some joyous moments during the grieving process as well.
No, 100%, and I think there's meaning that can be found in that, and I think that's the key for me. And I think the opposite of meaninglessness, isn't, what would be the word? Isn't vitality or excitement or whatever. Having things be meaningful can also be painful, and I think for me that was a good insight, is that the thing you shouldn't pursue is necessarily pleasure, but meaning. And meaning isn't, a lot of times meaning is actually painful, but it's rewarding, and it kind of, there's a sense of peace that comes with meaning. But anyway, yeah, sure. Now we're going all in,
we need the AI
not Freud, more Lacan. Yeah, exactly. Now we're going like psychoanalysis, full-on psychoanalysis. So let's maybe stop right there. Yeah, so Schalk, I don't know if you maybe want to lead us out. I think we can maybe end off by, I liked what you did last time, where everyone says something that kind of they found interesting or insightful or so forth, like the last couple of weeks or so forth. Yeah?
Yep, that works. So to tie a ribbon about your last comment, I found a lot of meaning, painful meaning, from my dad's passing 4 years ago. I realized and reflected on the last year of our relationship and the years before that, and realized there was a missed opportunity for a much better relationship. So, during the mourning process, I discovered that, and it made me also remember more of the joyous moments, talking to what you said there, Jeremy. So yes, there is sometimes joy to find in the midst of mourning, and there's sometimes a lot you learn out of that process. What I found insightful, wow, I think this is one of those where I haven't really listened or heard or watched anything that's been super. I watched Painkillers, though, which is the series you talked about, Schalk, in when we were talking Bhavani, and I get where it definitely hits home that that was intense. That was an intense series to watch. It's really good. So I think I resonated with it.
Yeah, especially those of us that have inclinations towards addiction and self-medication and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so easy to not see where you're going until you're really, really down, very low, at rock bottom. It's so easy to get there. One forgets when you've climbed out of the hole, you forget how easy it is to fall back in. So yeah, that was a really good one. I think something that we can also mention is when you're working, when you're focusing, when you're writing code, what's around you? And what I mean by that is, what do you use headphones? And if you use headphones, what's playing? What's in your ears? Are you? Some people put it like a movie on the side while they're working. Other people listen to music. Other people have white noise. Other people just want complete silence. I'm curious what the two of you have in your ears, so to speak, if that is what you do. For me, I'm still finding what works for me. I'm not entirely sure. I thought it was music. Now I'm unsure. So I'm trying other things. So I'm selfishly asking the question to maybe try something that the two of you are doing and see if it works for me as well. So that's where I'll end off for me. And let's outro with that.
I've been, for a long time, I would listen to podcasts or audiobooks while I was writing code, especially for CSS, where it feels like it's very mechanical and it doesn't really require much thought. But I've started to realize that it's actually not that great in terms of my ability to focus, that I don't absorb that much from the podcast or the audiobook, and I'm not as productive as I could be. So I've been gravitating now towards, I was doing trance music, but I was finding that was keying me up a little bit too much. So I'm now doing soothing classical music. That's my current playlist on Spotify. And I'm finding it's actually making me feel good listening to some violin music while I work. And I haven't watched anything or read anything recently because I'm on a external information fast at the moment. For the last 5 weeks, I've decided I'm going to try and minimize what's coming in and focus instead on having more mindful moments during the idle times throughout the day.
That's amazing.
I have a lot of success with like drum and bass, specifically like a really old school jungle music. I don't know what it is. It's like that franticness. I'm like, I don't know. There's like a cadence there between like the coding and like just how frantic it is. But a lot of times I put on like podcasts, but specific, I don't know how people do audiobooks, because it feels to me like something like an audiobook or whatever. If you miss 1 second or you miss one little piece, then you're completely lost. So I put on, like, I really enjoy podcasts that are very meandering, very tangential. Dare I say like this one? Where it's like, you know, like have all these tangential discussions and stuff going on. And it's more like having people speak in the background, as opposed to, all right, now we're going to talk about this. Point A, point 2, point 3. And if you miss point 2, you're completely lost. So the one that I really enjoy is, well, There's Your Problem. I don't know if you guys know about that, but it's like about engineering disasters and stuff. And like that show is just like one big tangent. It's like it can very easily be reduced to like 20 minutes. Sometimes it's like 2 hours, 3 hours long. I really enjoy it. Like, just once again, as background. Another one also is Behind the Bastards by Robert Evans. Same vibe as well, like the tangent and the stuff, and like just the almost the musings and the thinking out loud. And I find that to be very conductive to just like, I can't do silence. I don't know. It's like almost like I can't, like, it's almost I hear myself think and I can't concentrate. But yeah, so I tend to like podcasts or stuff that are very kind of meandering, and I don't have to concentrate. I can get enough of it. Like the cadence is slow enough that you can just get a little bit here and there and still kind of follow the threads. Yeah. So that's it from my side, yeah. Like, I'm glad you actually asked that, Schalk, because I don't actually have any other recommendations. So you gave me a pretty good answer.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing. Well, with that, I think this was another great conversation. And yeah, I love podcasts that is conversational. I mentioned this to the folks from Changelog yesterday. Like I said, just thanks for making such great podcasts. And I know as a fellow podcaster, all the work and stuff that goes into this. And like Jared came back and said, oh, thanks so much for saying that. Which of the last couple have resonated with you? And I like shared 3 of them. And he was like, oh, so I can see you like more the conversational ones. And I was like, yeah, I guess I do like those ones a lot. So I really do. I do enjoy conversational podcasts. So yeah, and I'm very grateful for the conversations we have on this, because I think they're also at the same time extremely meaningful and can have some meaning and resonate for other people. so they don't feel as alone. I think something that came out of the previous one with Bhavani was the sense of being alone. And I think the more that we talk about this openly, and we have podcasts like this, and people who are vulnerable and happy to be vulnerable and come on the show and talk about this stuff, more and more people will find a connection and feel a little less alone, which that's something that I learned about. The Surgeon General in the United States talked about mental health on the Sci-Fi podcast, and specifically talked about the loneliness epidemic. And so I think, us talking about these things and giving people some way of connecting with others, we're making our little contribution to making people feel just a little less lonely.
Yeah, I can maybe squeeze in a super quick one there. A great book, Bowling Alone, if you haven't read it yet. Which kind of also... Yeah, exactly. I think I have it back here somewhere. Yeah. It's a really great read, specifically on that, in terms of like social changes that kind of led to where we are today. Yeah. All right. Have a great one. Thanks so much for your time, Jeremy. And then I will see Schalk. I'll see you soon as well. Cool.
Yep. Lovely meeting everybody. Lovely meeting you, Jeremy. Have a great rest of your evening, and we'll have a good rest of our day.
Yes. Cool.
Bye.
Cheers.